Good morning. We begin today's program with the song Janaki Manoharam Bhaje, composed by Mysore Vasudevacharya and rendered by Srimati Manikrishna Swami.
जानकी मनोहरम भजे हम जानकी मनोहरम भजे हम जानकी मनोहरम भजे भानुवंश वनज भास्करं श्री जानकी मनोहरम भजे भानुवंश वनज जानकी मनोहरम भजे दीनलोक पालन चतुरम् दीनलोक पालन चतुरम् मौनिवर्य मानस विकारम् दीनलोक पालन चतुरम् मौनिवर्य मानस विकारम् जानकी मनोहरम् भजे भानुवंश वनज भास्करं श्री जानकी मनोहरं भजे वासमान वरशरचापधरं वासवादि विबुधावन परं वासमान वरशरचापधरं वासवादि विबुधावन परं भूसुरादि सुखदं परात्परम् भूसुरादि सुखदं परात्परं वासुदेवमानतादि परं भूसुरादि सुखदं परात्परं वासुदेवमानतादि परं जानकी मनोहरं भजे भानुवंश वनज भास्करं श्री जानकी मनोहरं भजे
Friends, welcome to lecture 225 of the South India Heritage Program. This morning, Mr. M.K. Sudarshan will speak on a few facets of the Sri Vaishnava identity. Thank you, Mr. Murli. Thank you, Dr. Sumati Krishnan. Let me now introduce today's speaker. A book with an unusual title was released at Tax Center last year. It is Unusual Essays of an Unknown Sri Vaishnava. The author, Mr. M.K. Sudarshan, was inspired by the life and works of Sri Ramanujacharya, and the book release happened during this year's centenary. Today, he'll give us a lecture on a few facets of the Sri Vaishnava identity. Mr. Sudarshan belongs to a long lineage of Sri Vaishnavites. Several of his ancestors have lived on the lands surrounding the ancient temples of Tirupati, Kanchipuram, and other holy cities. He graduated from Loyola College in Chennai, then qualified as a chartered accountant, and worked for 11 years with top corporates such as Wipro, Sundaram Fasteners, ITC, and so on. In 1993, he went abroad. During the next 24 years, he served as group controller, finance director, and CFO in conglomerates of the Middle East, in Bahrain, Kuwait, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. His work took him to more than 20 countries: the US, the UK, Europe, the Middle East, the Far East. After return to Chennai in 2016, he lives with his wife Divya in Abhiramapuram, pursuing lifelong interests in Indian philosophy, history, English literature, and Carnatic music. Mr. Sudarshan has always been a keen writer. He has written on business and finance for Business Standard, also for The New Horizon, which is a London-based magazine of the Islamic Banking Institute. He has written on religious matters for The Hindu. A few words about his book, Unusual Essays of an Unknown Sri Vaishnava. It is a compendium of essays. It contains his reflections on Vedantic philosophy, theology, scriptures, literature, personalities, and legends. The book was exhibited at international book fairs in Frankfurt, London, Denver, Beijing, Singapore, and Sharjah. It has won appreciation from two pontiffs, His Holiness Srimad Arhiya Singar of Ahobila Mutt and His Holiness Shankaracharya of Sringeri Mutt. Also blessings from the Swamiji of Pejawar Mutt, Udupi. A second and revised edition of the book has been republished. It consists of two handy volumes. Mr. Sudarshan is the managing trustee of the Dr. Mrs. Mani Krishna Swami Foundation, founded in memory of his mother. It promotes talent and scholarship in classical music and fine arts through activities in Chennai, Mangalore, and Bangalore. I asked Mr. Sudarshan about his favorite authors. They are Sujata and Kannadasan in Tamil, Graham Greene, John Le Carre, and Philip Roth in English, and Eknath Easwaran, a Vedantic philosopher who writes in English. His favorite singers are Semmangudi Srinivasa Iyer, K.V. Narayanaswamy, and T.M. Krishna among Carnatic stars, and Bhimsen Joshi, the Hindustani classical legend. What about film music? He loves all Kannadasan hits such as Enge Nimmadi, sung by T.M. Soundarajan. As for Hindi cinema, he loves Kishore Kumar romantic hits such as Mere Sapnon Ki Rani and sentimental hits such as Zindagi Ka Safar. The South India Heritage Program began in February 2002. It stimulates awareness and pride in the rich heritage of South India. 224 lectures so far have highlighted various facets of South India's heritage. Besides lectures, the Heritage Program has also presented music concerts and discourses, films, plays, book launches, and special events. The programs are sponsored by Mr. Chari and his brother Mr. R.V. Gopalan through the TAG group of companies and their family trust, Ramu Endowments. May I now request Mr. M.K. Sudarshan to deliver his lecture. Kindly switch off your cell phones or put them on silent mode. Thank you.
Srimate Lakshmi Narasimha Parabrahmane Namaha. Srimate Ramanujaya Namaha. Srimate Nigamanta Mahadeshikaya Namaha. Srimate Sri Vaishnava Shri Ranganatha Itendra Mahadeshikaya Namaha. Namaskaram. My Abhivandanams to all of you. Sri Artichari's kindness to me continues. Last year, he helped me to launch my book from this very stage. The book has done well. Early this month, it went into its second edition, and you can see it downstairs. Sri Chari now has put me today onto this stage to deliver a talk on a rather delicate subject. Sir, I thank you deeply for giving me this opportunity because I consider this a privilege to be able to address a high quality, highly intellectual audience like this. Thank you so much. Sri Chari puts people like me on stage here, and Sri Madhu introduces them. And Sri Madhu, with his introductions, makes me feel that I am on a pedestal. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel a bit nervous standing here before you. I know most of you are already knowledgeable about this subject. I see so many scholars sitting here. I also see quite a few Sri Vaishnavas here. By the way, when I talk to an audience, I like to know their profile. So on this subject, I want to know how many Sri Vaishnavas are here. Please don't get offended. Please put up your hands. That's quite a lot. I know there are a few other Sri Vaishnavas here who didn't put up their hands because they're probably not sure of their identity. But that's all right. So, because there are so many scholars here and there are so many Sri Vaishnavas here, I know that much of what you're going to hear from me today is going to be old hat. Nothing that you're going to hear from me today is anything that you cannot access yourself by reading the right textbooks, history textbooks, research books, monographs, good libraries. So under the circumstances, I'm sure you're going to ask me, what am I doing here on this stage this morning? Well, my answer is this. Many months ago, Sri Chari called me on the telephone just to check how my book was doing. We were talking of this and that, and finally, towards the end of our telephone conversation, he suddenly asked me a question which put me off guard totally. He asked me, Sudarshan, tell me, before Sri Ramanuja, did Sri Vaishnava have any identity? Were we not all the same Brahmins? Maybe we were all same Smartas and Advaitas. Now that question stumped me. With my little knowledge of Sri Vaishnava history, I stuttered some kind of answer, but Sri Chari was not convinced. So finally, before ringing off, he told me, look, why don't you do a bit of research on this and deliver a talk on this subject to the tag members? They might be interested. My father was a very good friend of Sri Chari, and I consider him as a family friend. So I couldn't say no to him. So I said, okay. And then my goose was cooked, and that's why you find me here standing before you. If you find this talk interesting at the end of this session, I'll take all the credit. And if you didn't find it interesting, Sri Chari will take all the blame. The question that Sri Chari put to me that day is like many other questions that I came across when I went onto the internet and did a search on the Tambram websites. And here are a few examples. I think these questions are probably already in your own minds, so I don't have to repeat these questions. Next. Yeah, that's fine. So one thing that, when you go through these questions, one thing that is very clear is, which is common to all of them, is that they are all questions of self-image. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? Where am I headed? And why? So these are questions of self-image. Now, we live in an age of visual communication. Anybody today who has a story to tell or an experience to share does it through visual images. A single powerful image conveys more than what 1,000 words cannot. So, on this subject, I went onto the internet and I tried to get one or two images which would be quintessentially the image of a Sri Vaishnava today. And what is the image that I got? Here is one. And then this one. So if you ask me, ladies and gentlemen, what do these images tell us? I would say that the answer can be got if we did a little social experiment. We could all just walk out onto the TTK Salai Road and pick out at random a few passerbys and ask them, sir, the moment you hear the word Sri Vaishnava, what comes into your head? I'm sure 6 out of 10 people will say, Vaishnava, oh, Namakaranga. They not only apply Namam on their forehead, like me, but they also put Namam on the forehead of elephants. So on the street, if that is the common perception of Sri Vaishnavas on the street, we must all ask ourselves a question, that is Namam, is that all that accounts for the Sri Vaishnava identity today? I, for one, would strongly protest and say, of course not. The question is, if not, then what is the Sri Vaishnava identity today? Now, last week, I was having a casual conversation on this subject of identity with my very good friend, Srimati Sushila Ravindranath, author and journalist on this subject. She's here today. Thank you, Sushi. I asked, she was, in the course of the conversation, she said that identity is very important for a person. A sense of identity is very important. So I asked her why. And she said, identity is important because it gives us a sense of empowerment. Identity is empowerment. I agree with that statement. The word identity today has come to mean a certain assertiveness, a certain aggression. In the public discourse, we hear phrases like identity politics, the social dynamics of caste identity, gender identity. Any group or community that carries any kind of long-term, long history grievance and wants redressal from society for those grievances. He does this, they do this. They create a narrative out of their identity and then turn it into a burning social issue, which is what I call identity intoxication. But the Sri Vaishnava's search for identity, let me tell you, has nothing to do with assertiveness, aggression, or identity intoxication. The Sri Vaishnava is not searching for any social space. He's not searching for any social recognition, nor is he advancing any community interests. In fact, if he did so, Sri Vaishnava would look absolutely foolish. Now, why do I say this? Look at this chart. Next. This is a chart which tells you what the 2011 census. The 2011 census says that the total population of Tamil Brahmins in the country is 1.85 million. Out of the 1.85 million Tamil Brahmins, my own guesstimate is that the Sri Vaishnavas would account for no more than a quarter, which is roughly about 430 to 450,000, which is 24% of the Tamil Brahmin population, and which is 0.6% of the Tamil Nadu population, and 0.035% of the total country's population. Now tell me, demographically, the Sri Vaishnavas are a non-entity. And it is a big irony that today I'm standing here talking about the identity of a non-entity. But ladies and gentlemen, demography is not everything. The Sri Vaishnava identity has its deep roots in history, in ancestry, in heritage. Therefore, it deserves attention. The reason why a Sri Vaishnava searches for an identity today is because it is a deep spiritual quest for the ideal of an ethical life, for a certain behavioral pathway that leads to personal fulfillment, personal freedom, and personal salvation. In the 14th century, there was a Maharashtrian saint, Narsi Mehta, and he sang a song which reflected this spiritual quest for the ideal ethical life. And that song became the favorite of Mahatma Gandhi. Vaishnava jana to tene kahiye, id parai jane re. He knows the pain of others. Pride never enters his mind. He tolerates and praises the entire world, does not speak ill of others, keeps his promise, actions and thoughts pure. He sees everything equally. His tongue may tire, but he never utters an untruth. He has renounced greed, deceit, lust, and anger. The poet Narsi would like to meet such a person by whose goodness the entire family attains salvation. That is the search of a Sri Vaishnava. Ladies and gentlemen, the Sri Vaishnava identity is a multi-dimensional one. And behind it, there is a long, complex, and fascinating story. My job today is to tell you that story by compressing it within 90 minutes of a Microsoft presentation. It is a formidable task. but I'm a brave man, and I'm going to do my best to make a heavy subject as light as possible for you. I shall focus only on a few facets of the Sri Vaishnava identity. I'm not going to give you a history of the Sri Vaishnava community. I can assure you that once I have done that, we will find answers for all the questions that we raised a couple of minutes ago. When I lived abroad, many friendly foreigners, colleagues of mine, especially the Westerners, who knew me and they wanted to know my Sri Vaishnava, my Sri Vaishnava background. And it was tough for me to explain to them. But I used to tell them that my Sri Vaishnava identity has 5,000 years of history. That it has 250 kilometers of geography. I used to tell them that my identity is mixed up with two languages, which are at least 10,000 years old. I used to tell them also that my identity is mixed up with 500 years of H and S. Now, what is H and S? I'm going to keep that in suspense. I like to keep you all in suspense. I'll talk about H and S later. Then I also tell my foreigner friends that my Sri Vaishnava identity owes much of its identity to 106 temples. And it also owes to countless native customs. And my identity is also belongs to dozens of dynasties and kings. And also to scores of Acharyas who have written more than 300, 400 works of scripture. All this was the story I used to tell my foreigner friends. And that is exactly the story that I'm going to tell you today. Now, before I jump into the subject, I have to tell my scholar friends here, I want to disclose to you what is the bibliography that I consulted, reread, and revisited to prepare for this presentation. I went back to the classics of Sri Vaishnava literature, and this is from the medieval period. I don't think I have to go through this because these are real Sri Vaishnava classics, and everybody here will easily recognize them. Then I also went to the what I call the medieval period, and there's a lot of books, the modern period, where there are a lot of books written in English language on Sri Vaishnava history. As you can see, the first one is an excellent lecture given in 1909 by Rao Bahadur Rangacharya. And then, of course, there are a few textbooks, standard textbooks. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. There's also an excellent book by S.M.S. Chari, S.M. Srinivasachari. And then my favorite, it's a book by the poet A.K. Ramanujam. That's one of the finest books I've read on Sri Vaishnava literature. And then, of course, there is an American scholar who's done research on the Tengalai Vadagalai Sectarian Divide. It's an excellent book. And then a recent book by Professor A. Nagaswamy on Tamil Nadu, the land of the Vedas. These are all excellent books. Next. I also was fortunate that Sri Chari gave me a lot of material which I classify them as postmodern literature. I'm sure all of these are also familiar to you. But the last book, The Battle for Sanskrit and Being Different by Rajiv Malhotra, is an excellent book, very, very thought-provoking book. And I would recommend that all of you read that book. So, it was from this select bibliography that my story today is going to be constructed. Let us first start with history. I'm a little sorry to say this, please don't get offended. But I find that even within the Sri Vaishnava community, especially the young ones, there is very little or no knowledge of even the broad history of Sri Vaishnavas. In fact, within my own extended family, whenever I ask members about it, they respond with total disinterest. And they shrug their shoulders as if to say that I don't know, I'm not interested, and history is so boring. Now, I can't tell you the story of the Sri Vaishnava identity without giving you an overview of the Sri Vaishnava history. I have no choice but to subject you all to the next 10 to 12 minutes, giving you a crash course on Sri Vaishnava history. And I hope it's not boring, because we are going to take a little journey across time. We are going to think of yourself now as sitting in a time machine about to do time travel. And I'm your pilot. And I'm going to take you through 5,000 years journey from the Vedic times to the present times. Along the journey, we will take 5 whistle stops. And those whistle stops are the Vedic and Agama period, about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. Then the Puranic period, around prior to 5th century BCE. Then the hymnist period of the Alvars, 5th century up to the 9th century. Then the medieval period, from Ramanuja's time up to the 15th century CE. And then the postmodern period, from the 15th century CE to the present times. So sit back, belt up, and let's do this journey of 5,000 years. Ladies and gentlemen, for the next 10 to 12 minutes. Let's go to history first. Now, the root of Sri Vaishnava identity can be traced back to the Rig Veda, which is the oldest religious literature in the whole world. In the Rig Veda, there are many gods, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, and so on and so forth. But in the Rig Veda, Vishnu is hailed as the preeminent god because he is the one said to be all-pervading and all-sustaining. So if he pervades everything and he sustains everything, all other gods too are pervaded by him and sustained by him. Speaking mostly in religious metaphors, Rig Veda describes Vishnu as he who pervades the 3 worlds, terra firma, the subterranean land and sea, and the heavenly spheres. Tridi pada vichakrame Vishnur gopa ada abhyaha. Vishnu is also conceived as the substrate and the immanent spirit of the entire universe. And beyond Vishnu, there is nothing to be conceived. Atyatishtat dashang gulam, says the Purusha Suktam. So Vishnu is the ultimate reality. He is the ultimate state. And he resides in a permanent state. And that state is called Paramapadam. Tad Vishnu of Paramam Padagam Sada Pashyanti Surayaha Vishnur Yat Paramam Padam. The Vishnu Sahasranamam also confirms this. Bhutatma Paramatma Cha Muktanam Parama Gatihi. So, from this fundamental Vedic conception of one supreme being Vishnu as its source, Sri Vaishnavism has arisen. Next. A little later during the Vedic times, Vishnu was associated with another god. His name was Bhaga, who had extraordinary powers to grant blessings. And so Vishnu became Bhagavat. And during the post-Vedic period, the worship of Bhaga became Bhagavat Upasana or Vishnu Upasana, where Vishnu underwent a process of deification. So Bhagavat Upasana and Vishnu Upasana continued for several centuries. Next. Then came what is called the Agama period. The Mahabharata clearly refers to a past period when Vishnu Upasana was widely practiced in India in accordance with the two systems of ritualized Vishnu Upasana or Bhagavat Upasana, and they were the Pancharatra and Vaikhanasa Agama. Both were based on the Rig Veda Kalpa Sutras. These Agama texts collectively were called Smritis or Samhitas, and the Pancharatra Agama itself is said to have 245 Samhitas. It was around this period too when the Saiva and the Sakta Agamas also were authored. Now, besides setting out these elaborate systems of formal and ritual worship, these Agamas also were excellent manuals for iconography, for consecration of idols, temple architecture, and how to conduct yajnas and sacrifices. Next. Now, during the long stretch of history between 500 BCE up to 800 CE, Vedic society and common people in India, by and large, faithfully embraced and adopted the agamic modes of worship. Religious life meant only two things. For the priestly classes, religious life meant performing yajnas and homas according to the Smriti Samhitas, Smriti Shastras. And for the common people, religious life meant worshipping in temples, again according to the Agama scriptures. But then over hundreds of years, this a cynical kind of sacerdotalism started creeping into the Vedic religious life. For ordinary people, it became impossible to practice religion outside the rigid regimen, procedure, and protocol of Smriti. The ritualism became so stifling and meaningless that common people lost faith in it. It was then that Buddhism and Jainism spread to large parts of India, although there were also Vedic systems like the Pashupata, Saivism, Saktaism, Sankhya, Nyaya, all these were Vedic systems, but in spite of that, Jainism and Buddhism were ruling supreme. Anti-Vedic philosophies like Shunyavada, Mayavada, Charuvaka, and Nastikavada, all of these flourished in large parts of India, and especially in Tamil country. They entrenched themselves under the Jainist Kalabara dynasty between the 3rd and the 7th century CE. But then by the first half of the 8th century, the heydays of Buddhism and Jainism also came to an end. What were the reasons? The reasons were that the Kalabara kings were defeated by a coalition of Pallava, Chera, and Pandya kings. People also got generally disillusioned by Buddhism and Jainism for the simple reason that Buddhism had no answer to the fundamental question, is there a God? If there is a God, what is his relationship with the universe? Buddhism and Jainism purposely ignored this aspect of philosophy, even though the human heart longed to know it. With Buddhism and Jainism waning, much of India sank into an existentialist vacuum. And then the Vedic Mimamsakas, Kumarila Bhatta was the most famous of them, with their ritual shastras, made us come back for a brief while. But people remained deeply confused. It was a period of great moral despair and limbo. Next. Two great historic and tectonic shifts took place in religious life in India between the 6th and the 9th century CE. They were the age of Bhakti and then the age of Advaita. It was during this period that the great Tamil Bhakti saints of South India were born. And they helped spread Vaishnavam and Saivam. And there were, as you know, 12 Alvars and 63 Nayanmars. And the best way to describe this period in history is through the words of the poet A.K. Ramanujam. In one swift but illuminating paragraph in his book, Hymns for the Drowning, Ramanujam captures the entire history, the entire age of Bhakti. I'm just going to quote it for a few minutes. I'm quoting him. Developments in the north during the period of the Guptas, 320 to 540 CE, truly prepared the ground for this mood of Bhakti. The Gupta kings called themselves devotees of God, Bhagavatas. They took the name of the gods, put the figures of Lakshmi, Vishnu's consort, and Varaha, his incarnation, on their coins and made mythology a state concern, enlisting particularly Vishnu and his heroic incarnation for their politics. The Guptas sponsored Vishnu and almost believed that Vishnu sponsored the Gupta Empire. Not only were the first Hindu temples built and the first Hindu icons sculpted during this period, but the official forms of Hindu mythology were set down in great syncretic Sanskrit texts called Puranas. By the 5th century CE, Vishnu, Shiva, their families and minions and enemies seem to have become as real as the human dynasties. In South India, by the 6th century, the Pallavas and later the Pandyas also arrived. Their inscriptions record the end of an era in South India history and the beginning of a new one. In the culture of this time, the two classicisms of India, that of the Guptas and the Tamils seem to have met. From the 6th to the early 9th century, when the Cholas again made a comeback, the Pallavas of Kanchi and the Pandyas of Madurai made bhakti blossom in Tamil Nadu. The imperial presence of Sanskrit, with its Brahmanical Smriti texts of the Vedas and the Upanishads, was a presence against which bhakti in Tamil defined itself, though not always defiantly. Bhakti thus arose out of the meeting of Sanskritic religions and mythology with Tamil conceptions of the same. These are very powerful, meaningful, significant words. Now, therefore, in this period, in the mystic works of the Alvas, the Nalayara Divya Prabandham, a bhakta found at last an easy path to God. He did not have to worship through ritual or theology. Through bhakti, he could possess God and be possessed by Him. And he could do it easily by singing, by dancing, making poetry, painting through shrines with idols and sculpture. Then in the 8th century came a giant of a Vedantic guru, Adi Shankara. Within just 15 years of his 33 years lifetime, Shankara completely rejuvenated the Sanatana Dharma through a new philosophy called Advaita. Advaita was a strongly anti-Purva Mimamsa. It was against ritualism, and it succeeded in establishing the Upanishads as the crowning glory of the Vedas. The age of Vedanta was born, which soon completely overshadowed Buddhism and Jainism, not only in India, but also in Tamil Nadu. Shankara's Vedanta was founded on Jnana Marga, but as a theology, Advaita could not make an emotional connect with common people who found it to be too abstract and too philosophical. And they could not truly derive religious satisfaction from it. So it was then around the 10th century CE that a new age for Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya dawned. It was the era of Sri Ramanujacharya. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, I want you to go mentally. Now I want you to go to North India. Go to a place called Devaprayag. In Devaprayag, you will see two rivers, the Bhagirathi and the Alakananda. Both have their main source in the Himalayas. But when they meet in Devaprayag, both the rivers give up their names and give up their identities. And thereafter, they flow as one mighty river, the river Ganga. Now, when Ramanujacharya came on the scene, I like to believe that he was the Devaprayag. Why? Because he was the confluence of two mighty upstreams. One upstream was the Upanishads. The other upstream was Bhakti of the Alvas. So when they merged into one, thereafter they flowed as one great river like the Ganga, and it was called Sri Sampradayam, or Sri Vaishnava. Now, as you can see, Ramanuja's predecessors, they prepared the ground for Sri Sampradaya. And you also had a whole lot of successors who carried the torch forward. But Ramanuja alone must take the credit for having created a new paradigm called Sri Sampradayam, because he took the god of the Rig Veda, Bhaga or Vishnu. He took elements of bhakti practices from the Pancharatra Agama, combined them together, and then infused into them the philosophy of Vishishtadvaita taken from the Upanishads. So, this unique combination was called Ramanuja Darshana. And it is all in one magnificent edifice of thought. So, ladies and gentlemen, now we have a panoramic view of the history of Sri Vaishnava identity. So, what are we going to do with it? Now, this history therefore tells us that Sri Vaishnavas did have an identity long before Ramanujacharya. That was the answer that I was wanting to give Sri Artichari when he asked me that question. But it took me several months to come up with that answer today. Long before Ramanujacharya, there was a pre-existing Sri Vaishnava identity. Therefore, the Sri Vaishnava identity does not begin with Ramanujacharya, nor should we ever think that it ends with Sri Ramanujacharya. And there is enormous epigraphical evidence available for it in our temples, ancient temples. And that was shared with me last week by scholar and author Srimati Padma Seshadri. Thank you very much, madam. It was a nugget of epigraphical evidence to show that even during Rajaraja Chola's time and before, Sri Vaishnavas were known as Sri Vaishnavas. So here is my thesis. There was a period before Ramanuja when a Sri Vaishnava identity pre-existed. Ramanuja needed only to create a new grammar of bhakti, but not a new paradigm of bhakti. And because it pre-existed, the Ramanuja's bhakti movement spread like wildfire. From deep Tamil country down south, it went to all parts of the country. We had people like, we had saints and preceptors like Madhvacharya, Ramanand, Vallabhacharya, Nimbarka, Krishna Chaitanya, and Kabir, who were all known to be either Ramanuja inspired or they were followers of Ramanuja. And their own respective followers became what is today the larger Vaishnava community, which is about 500 million today in this country. In Tamil Nadu also, during Ramanuja's time, the Bhagavata Goshtis today are in fact the people who call themselves as Reddiyars, Naidus, Nambis, Komti Chettiars, and Mudaliyars. And they all call themselves today as Ramanuja Dasas. In Karnataka also, there are communities like the Hebar and the Mandya Sri Vaishnavas. So, the Sri Vaishnava identity, ladies and gentlemen, is an ever-flowing Ganga. And this identity is not the handiwork of some ideology. It is not the creation of some prophet or messiah. It is an evolving inspiration. So if we understand this aspect of the Sri Vaishnava facet, we have now covered 5,000 years of history. I took a little more than 12 minutes. Sorry about it. But I'm glad I made this point clear. Now, let's go to the geography of Sri Vaishnavas, the identity. Next, please. The distance between Kanchipuram and Srirangam is about 250 kilometers. This is the geographical cradle in which the Sri Vaishnava identity was born, grew, and flourished. Now, many young Sri Vaishnavas ask me this question. Did Sri Vaishnavas, like all Brahmins, all come in a wave from the north and settle down in this geography? This is a question that young Sri Vaishnavas often ask me. Now, the theory of a post-Vedic Aryan invasion ever happening in India, in South India, has been completely demolished and discredited by scholars like Professor A. Nagaswamy. But given this 3,000, 4,000 years of broad sweep of history across South India, it is easy to imagine that there was a lot of internal migration that took place over this geography. Internal migrants kept trickling in, back and forth, from north, east, west, for any number of causes, both violent and peaceful. The violent causes may have been wars, famines, social repression, oppression. And peaceful causes may have been occupation, trade, employment, learning, marriage, kinship. Several migrants did move from all parts of India to southern peninsula, and vice versa too. Sri Athichari, he gave me a very interesting footnote to this history. He gave me information that the vice versa also happened. From the south also people migrated to the north. Between 1644 and 1652, there was a family of Sri Vaishnava Iyengars from Amba Samudram in Tirunelveli, who were invited by the king of Kashipur, Panchakot Gauranarayana Singh Dio, to become temple priests in the local Vishnu temple in a remote village called Gadibero, Purulia district, West Bengal. The Raja there gave this community of Sri Vaishnavas 1,455 acres of land as a gift of subsistence. Now that immigrant family still continues today in West Bengal, but the 1,455 acres of land have been taken away by the communist government. If you go today to Pushkar in Rajasthan, you will similarly see a lot of Tamil Sri Vaishnava families settled there. So this internal migration took place, not only from the north, from east, west, south, everywhere. Now, who are these internally migrating people? I have no doubt in my mind that they were multifarious, racial, ethnic, religious, and linguistic communities. What I mean is that they probably were Bhagavatas, Mimamsakas, Advaitins, Buddhists, Jains, Muslims, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, native Sanskrit speakers, native vernacular speakers, Sanskrit speakers, Vaishnavas, Smartas, Saivites, Tantric worshippers, and Ramanuja Dasas. So, and we can be certain that in this cross-migration, there was a lot of conversion from one faith to another. Jains becoming Sri Vaishnavas, Buddhists become all. There was definitely interfaith conversions happening. And there was also interfaith marriages taking place. So, with all this information, we can clearly say that the history of Sri Vaishnavas was one giant melting pot, and the geography of Sri Vaishnavas was one giant salad bowl. This is the only way that one can explain the subculture of bilingual Sanskrit and Tamil speaking Iyengars, Ayers, Smartas, Advaitins that evolved as a distinct identity in Tamil Nadu. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now that we have finished our history and geography lessons, and now that we know that we are a subcultural identity, Iyengars, Ayers, I think I'm in a better place to answer all those questions we started with. The first question was, how did the word Iyengar and Iyer originate, and what are the differences? Now, there are many etymological explanations for this word Iyengar. Both Iyer and Iyengar are derived from the word Arya, which is in the Sanskrit lexicon. It means a very exalted person. Please, Arya has no racist connotations. It has no ethnic connotation. It simply means a very exalted person of high learning and wisdom. Now, in the Tamil country, the Sanskrit-speaking communities were known to be men of high learning. They were devoted to learning and erudition. So they were called by the common folk as Arya. But in time, the Arya mutated into Ayya or Ayyan, a respectful term. And then later on, in the Tamil country, as we normally do, we add the suffix R as a mark of respect. So it became Ayer, Ayer. I also remember a scholarly article by the late Sri Navalpakam Ammini Devanatha Tatacharya. He was a philologist and a recipient of the President's Medal, President of India's Award for Sanskrit. And he is the authority. And he has said that both Iyer and Iyengar have the same origin. In Tamil, it became the word Ayyan, meaning a respectful person. But Iyengar is, however, a Telugu variant, meaning Ayyan plus Garu, Iyengar. Another explanation I have heard that supports the theory is that how many are here from Kanchipuram? There he is. There was in the Vijayanagar courts, they had Sri Vaishnavas, the Vijayanagar courts. And in Telugu, normally elderly persons, we call them Tataya. They were advisors to the king. And they were respectfully called as Tataya. When Vijayanagar kingdom took over the Kanchipuram temples here, they appointed some Tatayas to be the supervising priests and all that here. Now, in Tamil Nadu, the Tatayas became Tatacharya. Tata means venerable guru. In time, the Tata was dropped and it became Ayyagaru. Tataya Garu went, Tata was sloughed off, Ayyagaru. And then these Tatacharyas were referred to as Ayyagarus. Slowly, this Ayyagaru became Iyengaru. And this term which was normally applicable only to the Kanchipuram Tatacharyas became applicable to all Sri Vaishnavas, like, Xerox copier. Any copier today is a Xerox. So similarly, all Sri Vaishnavas took on the name of Iyengar. It meant not only Tatacharyas of Kanchipuram, but it meant all Sri Vaishnavas. But then the most orthodox explanation I have heard for this origin of the word Iyengar is that in Iyengar, the word I, Tamil I enna Anju. So, an Iyengar is a person who has gone through the 5 Pancha Samskaras, I Samskara. In Sri Vaishnava, I'm sure all of you know, Tapam, Urdhvapundram, Namam, Mantram, and Iji Aradhana. These are the 5 samskaras. So, Sri Vaishnava who went through these 5 samskaras were called Iyengar. So, I means Pancha Samskara. So, this is the very interesting etymology of the word Iyengar. Now I come to the next question. What are the major differences between Iyers and Iyengars? Now, see, I know my Sri Vaishnavism. I'm not too familiar with the Smartha tradition. So whatever I say now is the caveat. That's the caveat. But I'll simply tick off. The Smartha Iyers, they place more emphasis on the observance of the Vedic Smritis, whereas the Sri Vaishnavas place more emphasis on the precepts of their Acharyas. Second difference, in the matter of philosophy, Iyers swear by Advaita and their guru is Adi Shankara. And their preferred path to salvation, moksha, is Jnana Yoga. In the Vaishnava tradition, we follow only the Hindu Vishnu pantheon. And we subscribe to Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita. And for us, the goal of moksha is not mukti. For us, the goal is to achieve dasatvam, subservience to the Godhead. Dasatvam is very important for us. It is the equivalent of moksha for us. And the way to that for us is Bhakti Yoga and Prapatti Yoga. Not Jnana Yoga is there, but for us main is only Prapatti and Bhakti. But both Saiva, Smartha and Sri Vaishnavas, they all cherish temple going as a valuable tradition. Philosophically, some may say, no, temple, idol worship, no. But as a practice, all of them, they cherish temple going as a valuable tradition. The Smarthas venerate 275 temples. They are called Padal Petra Stalam. And we Sai Vaishnavas, we cherish Divya Desam, 106 Divya Desam, 106 Divya Desam. Smarthas include more of Sanskrit in their speech and prayers. Sri Vaishnavas, especially the Tangalai group, they include much more of pure Tamil in their speech. Now, despite these differences between the Smarthas and the Sri Vaishnavas, they recognize that they have common roots in their Vedas. And it is all too obvious today that the connection is very strong. And which is why today, more than at any time in the past, you have a lot of Iyengar marriages happily taking place. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to move on to another facet of Sri Vaishnava identity, which is that of kings and rulers who impacted the subculture of Tamil Nadu. Yeah. Now, north to south, Tamil Nadu is only 500 kilometers. It's a one-day journey. If you do it by car, it's a one-day journey. This distance today, which looks so small, was so great in the 11th century when Ramanuja went from Kanchipuram to Srirangam, that he left behind one subculture and he entered into another subculture. The land that Ramanuja covered by journey on foot had been ruled previously by successive dynasties and kings. But three dynasties had particularly great impact on the identity of Sri Vaishnavas. And they are the Chola dynasty, the Vijayanagar Empire, and the Tanjavur Nayak kingdom. Now, what is so special about these kingdoms, these three dynasties? History tells us that under these three dynasties, cultural expression in Tamil country, because they encouraged both Tamil and Sanskrit, flourished. They considered both languages as not only language of the gods, but also the state language. Sanskrit and Tamil was the language of royal inscriptions, court poetry, theatre, religious literature, and the Vedic sciences. Of the oral and vernacular tradition, everything that was deemed to be worthy of preservation was preserved by these kings. Once again, I have to quote my favorite poet, A.K. Ramanujan. I'm quoting him. Please listen to this very carefully. Sanskrit, Brahmins, and temples were part of the imperial design of the Tamil country under these rulers. The Sanskrit language gave dignity and resonance to any upstart king. Brahmins blessed and legitimized him and often gave him a genealogy if he lacked one. And the temples assured the towns and villages of his presence, his patronage, and his fidelity to a popular god like Vishnu. All three, therefore, Sanskrit, Brahmins, and temples, thus enlisted the gods. Unquote. Now, these kings, they gave away land to temples. In those days, the government gave land to temples. They didn't take lands, unlike today. They also gave tax-free incomes, pensions, and sinecures. They gave it as Brahmadeya. It was the king's strategy for forging a coalition of Brahmins with peasants, royal centers of administration with rural periphery, and Sanskrit with Tamil. The long lineage of Sri Vaishnava Acharyas was no exception. On behalf of their own following, laity, and constituency, they too engaged actively and constantly with these kings. Sri Vaishnava identity thus became an integral part of the imperial design of rulers who held the Tamil kingdoms together politically, socially, and culturally. Now, this is very important. Whenever the kings extended patronage and largesse to their temples, Sri Vaishnava flourished. But whenever royalty withdrew cold-shouldered support, the Sri Vaishnava identity simply withered. This is the lesson in history. Next. Now, this is a churning. That's why the little chakar. So, as I've explained so far, the forces of geography, history, kings, and state language policy all combined together in a subcultural churning in which the Sri Vaishnava identity expressed itself in two languages, Sanskrit and Tamil. The long and unbroken lineage of Sri Vaishnava Acharyas for about 500 years after Ramanuja era dedicated their entire lives to two main vocations. 500 years of a long line of Acharyas dedicated entirely to two vocations. What are those two vocations? That is H and S. Hermeneutics and Soteriology. Now, both these words are a mouthful, so I'm not going to repeat them. So I'm going to term them as H and S. Sri Vaishnava H and S. Now, what is hermeneutics? Hermeneutics is a branch of theology that deals with the principles of interpreting scriptures. What is soteriology? It is the study of the doctrine of salvation. How believers secure it through the understanding of the doctrines of redemption, justification, sanctification, propitiation, and atonement. So now we'll refer this to H and S, Sri Vaishnava H and S. Next. Now, these Sri Vaishnava Acharyas dealt exclusively for their H and S. They dealt exclusively with a body of Vedic scriptures. And these included the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Puranas, Vaishnava Agamas and Samhitas, the Prasthana Traya, and lastly the 4,000 Divya Prabandhams of the Advars, besides Ramanuja's own works. Now, this H and S, Sri Vaishnava H and S, during Ramanuja's own lifetime and a little after his lifetime, a group of Acharyas, what I call them the group A Acharyas, they wrote something like 30 important works. And they were mostly in Sanskrit. But after Ramanuja, for about 400 years, there were a large number of theologians who also wrote H and S. Something like, I would say, close to 300 works, 400 works of H and S. And that was the time when the northern Kanchipuram and the southern Srirangam subcultural differences became pronounced. Now, in the post-Ramanuja period, there was a group B Acharyas. And they wrote some brilliant H and S on these scriptures. But their H and S was mostly in pure Tamil or Manipravalam. They were written mostly for the edification of the large Tamil-speaking populations in the heartland of southern Tamil Nadu. In the post-Ramanuja period, from the Kanchipuram side, the Acharyas there, they authored about many, 150, 160 works. The main Acharya amongst them was Sri Vedanta Deshika. And he wrote his H and S mainly in Sanskrit because his audience were adversaries from the various schools in Kanchipuram at that time, which included schools of Advaita, Buddhist, Jain, and Vedantic branches of Nyaya, Vaiseshika, and Mimamsa philosophy. So it's very clear that during this period, a marked preference amongst the Sri Vaishnava H and S scholars emerged. Some preferred Sanskrit, some preferred Tamil, based on who was their audience. Next. Now here I'm just giving you a few examples of the Acharyas who lived during the time of Ramanuja and slightly after Ramanuja. if you see here, the first 4 rows, they all were almost contemporaneous with Ramanuja. They wrote mostly in Sanskrit. But after that, you can see some of them also wrote in Manipravala. Next. Post Ramanuja, you will see here that on the Tengalai Srirangam side, most of them wrote only in Manipravala, very few in Sanskrit. Whereas on the Kanchipuram side, most of it is in Sanskrit. So, because this became the H&S style, this was the difference of style, not of substance. There was no substantial difference in the H&S. But the H&S style differed because of the language that they adopted to convey and communicate their H&S. Now, this American scholar, Patricia Mume, in her book, she brought out a very sharp insight into this particular pronounced preference for language for the H&S. Next. Now, I don't want you to read all this. I'm just giving you this just to understand that the Tengalai's focus, the Tengalai Acharya's focus was on theology, whereas the Vadagalai Acharya's focus was on philosophy. The Southern Acharyas were appealing to the heart. The Northern Acharyas were reporting to the head. As you can see, that the Tengalai H&S promoted religious devotion as embraced by the Alvars, whereas the Vadagalai H&S sought to articulate Sri Vaishnava doctrine as a coherent philosophical system. So this was the basic difference. Now, because of this pronounced difference in style, we had 2 happy outcomes. The first, and we also had 2 very unhappy outcomes. The first outcome, a happy outcome, was that the philosophy of Ramanuja Darshana became consolidated during this period, more than ever before during the Advaita period. The second happy outcome was the tradition of Ubhaya Vedanta was born. Ubhaya Vedanta is nothing but Bhakti theology of the Alvars underpinned by the Vishishtadvaita philosophy of the Upanishads with Sanskrit and Tamil. But there were 2 very unfortunate outcomes. The first unfortunate outcome was that the H&S styles of these acharyas started assuming sectarian overtones and they became polarized. Next. They became so polarized that by the time of the 15th or 16th century, the Srirangam community and the Kanchipuram community, although they accepted the Acharya lineage from Ramanuja upwards, but they would not, the Srirangam community would not accept the northern Acharyas in that box, far box, and the northern community would not accept the southern Acharyas. When I say not accept, I mean acceptance of the H&S, not that they don't accept them as venerable people. Please don't get me wrong. They would not place importance for the H&S of those Acharyas. As this polarization became more and more acute, another trend started setting in between the 17th to the 19th century. And that trend, next, was what I call the federalization of the Acharyas. What I mean by federalization is that the polarization happened, and as the H and S became more and more pronounced in the differences, there was a trend towards loose federalization of structures, organizations. The northern school under Vedanta Deshika, they had their own federal organization of Swayamacharyas, who were acharyas unto themselves. And then in 1400 AD, there was another federal organization called Ahobalamat. And then there was, even earlier, 1338, there was the Parakalamat. And then around 1700, 1850, there was the Andavan Ashramam of Sri Rangam and Poundarikapuram. And the successors of these federal matams, to this day, they continue. And they continue as federal organizations. The same way with the Tengalai Kalai. Pillai Lokacharya was their principal acharya. After that, Malavala Mamuni. And they have their own federal structures, which is in 1487, the Vanamamala Jiyar Mat was formed. Then the Srirangam Narayana Jiyar and Tirumala Jiyar, they had their own organization. And 1520 AD, the Melkot and Yachiraja Matam began as a federal organization. And of course, Sri Perumbudur, Yachiraja Matam also is there. So this polarization and federalization became the norm. Now I want to take up the next facet, which is the temples, the 106 temples of Sri Vaishnavas. Now, given this polarization and federalization of the Acharya Parampara, between the 16th and 19th century, Srirangam became the bastion of the Tengalai followers, and Kanchipuram became the bastion of the northern followers. Tengalais identified themselves with Srirangam, and Vadagalais identified themselves with Kanchipuram. And since Sri Vaishnava temples, the 106 temples, are around the Srirangam region, those temples outnumber the temples in the northern Kanchipuram region. Slowly, you found that the Tengalai community attained a certain degree of dominance over their northern cousins. Now, this will become very clear if we study the map of the dispersion of the temples. Next start. Now, if you see this map, you draw an imaginary line bifurcating Tamil Nadu. If you see the north, you find that there are 24 Divya Desams. Forget the 8 in the north of India and 1 in the western India. Forget that. But in Tamil Nadu, in the north of India, you have 24 temples, which were of ancient heritage. But if you come down to the south and take a district-wise count, you find that there are 73 temples, which means that the temples in the south of India outnumbered the north by a ratio of 3:1. Now, what does this mean? It means that economic wealth and social influence, which is centered around temples, that became more dominant in the south than in the north. This is historical fact. You can't deny it. Now, I come now to the next facet of Sri Vaishnava identity, which is probably the most controversial. I'll try to quickly finish it within the time given to me, but it is a very delicate subject. Next, which is the difference between the H&S of the Srirangam and Kanchi Acharyas, which is the Tengalai and Vadagalai difference. Now, both Kalais, they believe in the fundamental Sri Vaishnava doctrine propounded by Ramanujacharya called Prapatti or Sharanagati. Now, all Sri Vaishnavas believe that the way to moksha is initially through the paths of jnana and karma. What the Greeks call it as, Latin, what they call it as via contemplativa and via activa. Karma and jnana, both are required. Now, when both these are practiced in life, they ultimately fuse into what is called bhakti, which is ceaseless meditation of Vishnu for the purpose of attaining salvation. But Ramanuja very clearly said, next please. Ramanuja clearly said that Bhakti Yoga we are all incompetent to practice Bhakti Yoga because only adepts, jnanis and devotees can really practice Bhakti. Therefore, there was an easier way out, which is called Sharanagati or Prapatti, which is why in his Vedartha Sangraha, he very clearly said it is not possible to attain moksha without observing Prapatti in some form or the other. Now, I'm not going to get into Prapatti doctrine because that will take another 1 hour. So, I'm simply going to say that Prapatti is a doctrine which is firmly founded on the Vedic Pramanas. And these are the Pramanas. As you can see, the Vedic Pramana and Vedantic Pramana for Prapatti doctrine is available in the Rig Veda, in the Upanishads, in the Agama Shastras, in Sri Valmiki Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, Alvar Prabandhams, and Ramanuja's own works. So, this Prapatti doctrine is well founded in the Vedic scriptures. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Now, both the Tengalai and Vadagalai schools, they swear by this Prapatti. But in their H&S, they differ slightly. They differ slightly because they emphasize, they give more emphasis to certain aspects of the same doctrine differently. That's all. There are 18 such differences. Those differences were codified by a 19th century scholar. His name is Sri Varavara Guru, 19th century scholar called Sri Varavara Guru, not to be confused with Varavara Muni, who is Manavala Maman. So this Varavara Guru, he codified all these 18 differences. And out of these differences, let me tell you, out of 18, only 5 have real differences in philosophy. The other 11 differences are related to abstract doctrine, which to be honest with you, many people don't understand. And there are only 2 differences which are relating to ethics, social ethics. Now again, I'm not going to go into this because that will require another session which Acharya may, if he wants, he will arrange for it. Not by me, but better scholars than me. The philosophical differences are that the Tengalais, they reject human free will. After Prapatti, humans have no free will. The Vadagalais believe that there is a certain element of free will even after prapatti. Because if there is no free will, it defeats the karma theory. So there is a little bit of free will. This is what the difference, slight difference. Then the other philosophical difference is that the status of Lakshmi Tattva. The Vadagalis believe that Lakshmi is an equal ontological entity with Ishvara Tattva. Because Lakshmi represents cosmic compassion, which is a countervailing force against cosmic stern justice, which is what Ishvara is. So this is the only difference. The Tengalis feel that if you posit Lakshmi as another equal ontological entity, then the ekatvam of Brahman, Brahma ekatvam is defeated. Because then you become two. You don't become Advaita. You become more of Dvaita. But the Vadagalis, they counter the argument by saying that there is Ramanuja's doctrine called Apritak Siddhi, which completely removes any inconsistency in that argument. Anyway, these are all very fine philosophical arguments which we don't have to go into now. Then there are 11 doctrinal differences. Now again, I'm just putting this here just for you to get a flavor of what is going on. I'm not going to explain all this. All of this relates to what is called the concept of grace. Next chart, please. Now, what is grace? Grace is said to be the unmerited and unconditional divine assistance given to humans for their regeneration. It is a virtue coming from God, a state of sanctification enjoyed through divine assistance. In very short words, the Tengalis believe that prapatti by itself achieves grace of God. Once you achieve grace of God, you achieve moksha. The Vadagalis believe that grace by itself does not secure moksha. Grace has to be predicated upon effort, bhakti sadhana. So that's why, if you see the chart here, on the top, prapatti is a direct route upaya to moksha, which is the Tengali school. It's called nirhetuka kripa. God does not need any condition for him to give you grace. Because God is not conditioned by human behavior. He can give you grace, he can give you moksha out of his own free will, out of his own volition. He is not conditioned by human behavior, which is called nirhetuka kripa. The Vadagalis, on the other hand, they say that yes, it is God alone who can give you grace and moksha, but he must have a pretext. You must have a pretext for it. You must achieve a state where you become the recipient of such grace. So you must engage in karma, you must engage in bhakti sadhana. So without sadhana, there is no grace. So you need both. So you see that two simultaneous arrows here, which you need bhakti sadhana plus prapatti leads to moksha, and that is called sahetuka kripa. So the southern school talks of nirhetuka kripa. The northern school talks of sahetuka kripa. Now what is the difference, sir? Please. Now what is the final essence? The essence is that the Vadagale looks upon prapatti as a process. The Tengale looks upon it as an attitude. Now this is being represented beautifully in two visual images. Next. Now, on the left side, you see mummy cat, and you see baby kitten. The kitten is doing nothing. It surrendered itself to mummy. Mummy does everything. She picks up and gives the kitten protection. This is called antinomianism in biblical terms. Antinomianism means that antinomianism, socially established dharmic laws or other karma yoga practices, moral or scriptural, are either of no use or they are of lesser obligation. This is called the antinomianism, which is equivalent to Nirhetuka Kripa of the Tengale school. Which is, what they are saying is, it is an attitude which matters, nothing else matters. The Vadakale school, on the other hand, says, no, grace comes from God only He can give grace. But you have to cling. It is a process. You have to cling to God. And that's why you see little baby monkey there. She's making an effort. She's clinging to mother. And that clinging is a process. And that is the difference between the process of prapatti and the attitude of prapatti. This is a very fine difference. But they make it into a huge, nirhetuka kripa, sahetuka kripa, and so on and so forth. So, next. Then the last two difference in the Ashta Dasha Vichara, which I talked about, out of 18 differences. The last two are, what you call them, ethico-social aspects of the doctrine, which I'm not going to go into. Please, I have no time. Next. Now I come to what I call is the least researched part of our Sri Vaishnava history. And that is the British colonial period. What impact did the British colonial period have on the Sri Vaishnava identity? That's a question that I asked myself and I've asked many people. I'm going to say a few things from a personal perspective. You may either agree with me or you may not agree with me. But you must listen to what I'm saying. My Sri Vaishnava great-great-grandfather, who was a lawyer in those days in the British times, he might have held a brief for the British Crown in a few cases. My other early ancestors of that period may also have been village munsifs or village tahsildars on the British payroll. I'm sure they were all convinced that British rule was really a great thing to have happened to India. I'm equally sure they would have protested if anyone had said to them that the British really cared very little for the upkeep and sustenance of temple institutions. In the same way that temples were protected, preserved, sustained by the old Hindu kings, like the Vijayanagar kingdoms. And that the British did much more than anybody else in our history to systematically impoverish both the economic and the cultural commonwealth of Sri Vaishnavas. Now look at this. Just please look at this. Just refresh your history. In earlier history, Sri Vaishnavas actively resisted the Muslim invasion and the Mughal oppression. Sri Rangam and other temples were sacked and looted. Acharyas like Ramanujacharya and Vedanta Deshika were themselves personally involved in the resistance against Islamic expansionism. This is history. Surprisingly, the same Acharyas who came later against British imperialism, they did exactly the opposite. They humbly accepted the British as overlords and took their jobs and their salaries. They willingly assumed the identity of subservient servants to alien masters. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that in the whole generations of my Sri Vaishnava ancestors during the British time were good and virtuous men. I'm thankful to them. Don't get me wrong. I respect them. I thank them. But I believe that they made wrong choices in life because they chose to be on the wrong side of history. To the best of my knowledge, no Sri Vaishnava historian, I'll just take about 5-10 minutes, sir. To the best of my knowledge, no Sri Vaishnava historian has ever adequately researched this chapter in history. I wish some young Sri Vaishnava historian, like maybe Madhusudan Kalachalvan or somebody, would do this. Adequately research the impact of British colonial India on Sri Vaishnava identity. The British were aware of much of the wealth of the Sri Vaishnava temples, which temples possessed. Rather than openly covet those commonwealth of culture and economic wealth of the temples, like the Mughals did, the British instead exploited and leveraged to further their own devious policy of divide and rule, which was their imperial design. And how did they do this? We know that they pitted local kings and princes against one another, turned them against the temples, sowed the seeds of language discord between natives and migrants, aggravated chauvinistic and provincial sentiments, injected caste consciousness, taxed temples differently and arbitrarily, and demanded tribute. But most important of all, the British did one brilliant thing, which in one fell swoop completely transformed the identity of Sri Vaishnavas forever. And what did they do? They co-opted Sri Vaishnavas in the thousands into Her Majesty's government service, giving them all cushy white-collar jobs. By and large, Sri Vaishnavas became part of the British establishment and felt proud at times that they were part of the great British imperial design. Then the British did one more thing. They cleverly imposed English jurisprudence on Sri Vaishnavas as though it were the most impartial and equitable mechanism for settling disputes relating to religious belief, worship, and customs. The poisonous idea of resorting to civil litigation in courts of law to resolve an intra-community religious dispute was first seeded into the Tengalai and Vadagalai mindset back in 1792. It was the famous Privy Council case to decide which namam to put on the elephant. The case dragged on from 1792 and finally got some kind of settlement in 1976. Next chart. Again, this chart is not meant to be read. I'm just giving you this as a background. In the next 200 years, the Tengalai and Vadagalai went on to contest in courts several other sectarian matters. Satamarai, the right to render temple seva kalam services, hereditary rights of archakas, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not here to pass judgment or anything. All I want to say is that the long and dark shadow of history grows longer and longer today. Just a few weeks ago, a Madras High Court judge, Mr. Judge Vaidyanathan, recorded his observation on record. And this is what he said. Unfortunately, as there is a difference between Vadagalai and Thengalai of Iyengar community, the issue is yet to attain finality. After 1796, yet to attain finality. As long as this globe exists in the orbit, their differences would not be resolved. Instead of terming themselves as human beings, they should first know the importance of being human. A Madras High Court judge, Justice Vaidyanathan. Now, I think underneath all this sectarian tension, I'm sure Sri T.K. Ramachandran will know this well. Underneath all this sectarian tension, I think, is a struggle for control over temple property and temple influence. It is easy to see why. Control paves the way for larger and more powerful state political group interests to come into play. Temples, Brahmins, Sanskrit, as A.K. Ramanujan, the poet, wrote, are still part of the imperial design, even today. But in today's context, the imperial design, putting it cynically but mildly, is a toxic cesspool of all varieties of corruption. It bears simply no comparison at all with the benign and virtuous nexus that once existed during the Chola, Pallava, or Vijayanagara times between Acharyas and the sovereign power. But don't get me wrong, despite all these differences, the Vadagalais and Thengalais still have mutual respect, tolerance for each other. Next chart. Now, this chart gives you a global perspective of sectarian conflicts. Sir, I won't take more than 5-10 minutes. I'll finish it. 5 minutes. Now, this chart gives you the global perspective on sectarian conflicts. Tolerance is one thing, mutual respect is another thing. I can tolerate somebody and not have mutual respect. Now, that's the case between the sectarian groups. If you look at the Christians, you have Catholic and Protestants. Their relationship is no respect, no tolerance. Violence and war is the result. Islam, Sunni and Shia, no respect, no tolerance, again war and violence. Buddhism, Mahayana, Hinayana, respectfully tolerant, indifferent coexistence. Sikhism, Akali, Nirankari, intolerantly respectful, frictional coexistence. Judaism, so many sects are there, respectfully tolerant, they enjoy some easy coexistence. Confucianism, China, they have a lot of sects, respectfully tolerant, but they're almost extinct. In the communist society, where can these sects exist? When you come to Sri Vaishnavism, I will say that it is mostly respectful to each other. Sporadic intolerance and testy coexistence, which is why we still, Thengalais and Vadagalais, they still marry into each other's families. We celebrate festivals together. We have common interests, common values. So, finally, last is the balance sheet. I am a good CA, so I thought I'll prepare a balance sheet of a non-entity's identity. Now, if you look at the left side, you have the assets, today's assets of the Sri Vaishnava identity, and on the right side, you have the minus or the liabilities of the Sri Vaishnava identity. The assets are very clear. Sri Vaishnavas uphold the institution of temples, 106 temples. No matter all the problems we have, we still have the support of good people, both in the government, outside the government. And we still maintain the institutions of temple, which we should, as Sri Vaishnavas, all be proud of. Side by side, we are also preserving the ancient Tamil devotional literature of the Narara Divya Prabandham, which is today an inspiration for millions of people across the world. We have to be proud of it as Sri Vaishnavas. And finally, we have also memorialized the institution of Acharya Matams. The Acharyas today for us are very important, and we cherish them. And they, in their own way, they are doing yeoman service to preserve our Sampradayam and our Parampara. So we should be proud of all these three things. These are the assets. Now we come to the liabilities. Accountants usually focus more on liabilities than assets. First is the large-scale emigration. I call Sri Vaishnava physical immigration. Just go back one sec. We call it the large-scale immigration, geographical immigration, occupational immigration, and cultural immigration. What do I mean by geographical immigration? Next chart, please. As I told you here, out of 430,000 Sri Vaishnavas, 10,000 or 15,000 are already gone abroad. US, Gulf, Australia. So about 400,000 people have done what they call occupational immigration. They've gone out of temples, they've gone out of H&S, they moved into all secular professions. So what is left is only about 25,000 people who are reading genuine Sri Sampradaya tradition. Now, this has a fracturing effect on the identity. What is that fracture? Next chart. Today, we have so many identities. We have Vadagalai identity, Tengalai identity, then we have NRI Kalai identity, and then we have somebody called Ersatz, secular Sri Vaishnava. Whatever it means, I don't know, but that is secular Kalai. And finally, you have the unknown Kalai, which is me. I suffer from what I call religious schizophrenia. On Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm a Orthodox Sri Vaishnava. On Tuesday, Wednesdays, I am a free-thinking liberal. And on Tuesdays, I think I'm an agnostic, because that's why when I start hearing voices in my head. Now, because of this mass occupational immigration, Sri Vaishnava community has lost all its distinctive identity. It has lost Ubhaya Vedantam. The tradition of the loss of Ubhaya Vedantam is the biggest loss for the Sri Vaishnava community. Tamil la potu nan sollirren. Enga Manasiga Acharya Mukkur Lakshmi Acharya irundar. He was the inspiration for me. He used to say that when you lose a language, Sri Vaishnava Paribhasha or language, Sri Vaishnava Paribhashas, where we talk in each other. Yes, sir, 2 minutes, sir. When you finish this Paribhasha language, once you lose the culture. This Paribhasha leads to behavioral change because it leads to politeness. Now, Kanchi, he referred to a story told by Kanchi Paramacharya. Kanchi Paramacharya said that this Paribhasha, which leads to politeness, leads to extreme politeness among Sri Vaishnavas. அது எப்படி அப்படின்னா, ஒரு வயசானவர் ஸ்ரீ வைஷ்ணவர் ஒரு பல்லக்கில் ஏறணும். 2 young people are there ready to carry on the பல்லக். இவர் முள்ள அங்கேருந்து வர்றாரு. இவர் வயசானவர், இவர் முடியல. அவர் he's getting impatient. வைஷ்ணவ பரிபாஷையில் தேவரீர் ஏழரீரா அப்படின்வா. இவர் ஏழை முள்ள வராரு இவர். So he got very upset. தேவரீர் ஏழரீரா இல்லை ஏழை பண்ணுட்டுமான்னார் அவர். இதில் என்னன்னா, ஏழரீரான்றது பல்லக்கிலையும் ஏறலாம், ஏழை பண்ணட்டுமான்னா பால் பேரிங்கும் பண்ணலாம். அதனால இந்த ஸ்ரீ வாஷ்ணவ வந்து the politeness, the language itself leads to polite behavior. அது எப்படின்னா சோக்கியமானு கேட்க மாட்டான், சுவாமினாகா திருமேனி பாங்கா, இல்லைன்னா சாப்பிட்ட உடனே பரம போக்கியமா இருந்தது, தாசஸ்ய விண்ணப்பம். இதெல்லாம் வந்து ஸ்ரீ வைஷ்ணவ பரிபாஷை. They will never say அவர் மறைந்தார், அவர் செத்து போனார்லாம் சொல்ல மாட்டான். They will say அவர் காலமானார்லாம் சொல்ல மாட்டான். They will say சுவாமி திருநாட்டுக்கு ஏழினார், ஆச்சாரியன் திருவடி அடைந்தார், பரமபதம் நாடி சென்றார். So this is we have lost all this. The Ubaya Vedanta tradition is lost. Now finally I have to come to the end of my talk. Sri Chari is now very upset with me. Throughout this presentation, ladies and gentlemen, I emphasize that the Sri Vaishnava identity to be an expanding and evolving one within a timeless Vedic horizon. Today's Sri Vaishnavas unfortunately seem to have been dinned into believing that their identity begins in the 11th century from the time of Sri Ramanujacharya and ends with either Sri Vedanta Deshika or Manavala Mumuni. This is not correct. So I feel that we are trapped in a time warp of our own making. We should not become like the Semitic religions, where for them one prophet at one point of time is the end all of everything. We are not like that. Our ideals are endless. So finally I ask myself, today Sri Vaishnavas, we are trending towards more and more ritualism. How much of our bhakti is ritual and how much of our ritual is bhakti? I don't know. My talk today ends with the same slide, with the same questions with which we started. Who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I today? Where am I headed tomorrow, and why? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that all life is a bit like that. We think all life is linear forward. Life, however, moves cyclically backward. It has a funny way of taking us all back to life, right to the start, when we keep searching for our real identities. We all have wonderful secular education, we all have wonderful technology, and we think that, look, if I have a professional identity, education has given me an identity, my occupation gives me an identity, who cares whether I'm a Sri Vaishnava or a Smarta? This is the outlook of many young people today. But the problem is that your secular identities are not permanent. There comes a time in life when I realized that I, being a chartered accountant or an IAS or an entrepreneur or a top scientist, does not fully or satisfactorily define who I am or explain my inner being even to myself. That's when the search for identity really starts. It's a spiritual search for clear truth, for clear knowledge, for everlasting freedom and salvation in life. The search for that one ideal ethical life, which Narsi Mehta sang about. 1500 years ago, before Narsi Mehta, Namadvar, the greatest Sri Vaishnava Acharya, also prayed to God for the same thing. He begged Vishnu to grant him an ethical life and a clear sense of identity. A life which he called free of the dirt of the flesh, Arukkudambum. I want to end my talk with the Pasuram sung by Namadvar. Uinindra ஞானமும் எல்லா ஒழுக்கும் அழுக்குடம்பும் இன்னின்ற நீர்மை இனியாம் உறவாமை உயிரளிப்பான் என்னின்ற யோனியமாய் பிறந்தாய் இமையோர் தலைவா மெய்நின்ற கேட்டருளாய் அடியேன் செய்யும் விண்ணப்பமே. தேங்க்யூ.
Friends, Hinduism is one of the most complex religions, and Vaishnavism is one of the most complex philosophies. No praise can be too high for Mr. Sudarshan for the thought, effort, and research, for all the effort he put into his book. And today he shed light on facets of the Sri Lanka, facets of the Vaishnava identity with remarkable clarity and insight. And I'm sure most of us understand our identity a little better today than we did earlier. Please join me in thanking and complimenting Mr. Sudarshan and in wishing him all the best in all his future endeavors. Thank you very much and have a great Sunday.
जानकी मनोहरं भजे हम जानकी मनोहरं भजे हम जानकी मनोहरं भजे भानुवंश वनज भास्करं श्री जानकी मनोहरं भजे भानुवंश वनज भास्करं श्री जानकी मनोहरं भजे दीनलोकपालन चतुरं आ